A human helped a forgotten alien in secret. Then the SUVs appeared outside HFY. Dr. Emily Carter sat in the dim glow of her computer screen, the sound of soft clicking filling the small room. The lab was quiet, the kind of quiet that made her feel both focused and isolated. Most nights were like this. She wasn't one for social gatherings or idle conversations. Her world revolved around the mysteries of the universe, the patterns in the stars, the unknown signals from space, and the strange anomalies that no one else seemed to care about. She'd been working for hours, piecing together data from her latest project. But tonight, something was different. As she sifted through a series of strange radio frequencies, she noticed a pattern. It wasn't random noise as she had expected. This was something calculated, deliberate. The signals were too complex to be just interference. Curiosity tugged at her. She leaned closer to the monitor, her fingers dancing over the keyboard as she tried to isolate the source. It was coming from a nearby forest. Her heart quickened. This wasn't just a malfunction, it was a call. She should have told someone. She should have contacted her supervisors or at least her colleagues. But Emily knew how the system worked. If she alerted anyone, they would take over. They would steal her work, claim it as their own, and bury her research under the weight of bureaucracy. No one else cared about the truth, only the recognition that came with it. So, Emily made a decision. She would investigate on her own. With a sigh, she grabbed her jacket and slipped out of the lab, locking the door behind her. The night air was cool, a perfect contrast to the stuffy warmth of the lab. Her mind raced as she made her way toward the forest, a mile or so from the edge of the small town she called home. The forest was quiet at night, and the only sounds she could hear were the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. When she reached the clearing where the signal seemed to originate, she froze. There, lying motionless on the ground, was a creature unlike any she had ever seen. At first, she thought it was some sort of animal, perhaps injured, perhaps dead. But as she approached, she realized it was something much more extraordinary. The creature was humanoid, though its features were unlike anything human. Its skin was smooth, pale, almost translucent in the moonlight. The creature's limbs were elongated, its hands and feet with long, thin fingers and toes. Its head was large, with smooth contours, and eyes, dark and enormous, seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. The creature was covered in strange markings, symbols Emily recognized as part of the signal she had intercepted earlier. Her breath caught in her throat. Could this be real? She reached out a trembling hand, not sure what to expect. She had read about alien encounters in books, heard stories of sightings, but this was something beyond anything she had imagined. The creature stirred, its eyes fluttering open, and for a moment they locked with hers. A voice, no, a thought pierced her mind, clear and direct. "Help me." Emily stumbled back, almost falling to the ground. She hadn't expected that. Her mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. She had heard stories of telepathic communication, but she never thought it was real. The creature raised a hand weakly, its voice, its thought filling her head again. Please help. The fear that gripped her was palpable. There was no way she could just leave it there. But the implications of what she had just found, the truth of this creature's existence, could destroy everything she had worked for. The government would want to cover this up. They would send in agents, lock everything down. No one could know, but it was alive. It was asking for help. Emily took a deep breath, squatting beside the creature. "I'll help you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure how. Her mind was reeling, but her instincts were clear. She couldn't leave it to die out here. With great care, she lifted the creature into her arms, surprised at how light it was. She carried it through the forest, her heart pounding with every step. She was terrified, yes, but there was also something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time: excitement. This was the discovery of a lifetime. No one could know about it yet, but she was the first to find something truly alien. By the time she reached her car, the creature was unconscious, and Emily was exhausted. She quickly drove back to her house, trying to remain calm, though panic kept threatening to rise in her chest. She had no idea what to do next, but she knew she couldn't risk getting caught. Not yet. She laid the creature on the couch in her living room, staring at it in awe. The strange markings on its skin seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Emily was a scientist. She had always been curious, always seeking answers. But this was beyond anything she had ever expected. Hours passed. Emily sat next to the creature, watching over it, trying to figure out what to do. She couldn't just let it die, but she also had no idea how to heal it. Her knowledge of biology wasn't enough to understand how to help this alien being. Eventually, the creature stirred again. This time it didn't speak to her mind. Instead, it let out a soft, strained sound like a whisper of pain. Emily rushed to its side. She could see now that it had suffered severe injuries, broken limbs, burns on its skin, and wounds that looked too deep to be from any natural creature. With trembling hands, she reached out to touch the creature's arm. "You're safe here," she thought, trying to communicate through her mind, though she wasn't sure it would work. She was no telepath, but the creature's eyes met hers again, and she could sense its relief. "Thank you," it said, its voice echoing inside her head. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The gravity of what she was involved in now sank in. She wasn't just hiding an injured creature. This was an alien, a being from beyond Earth, and she had no idea what to do next. But one thing was certain: her life was never going to be the same again. Outside, she heard the sound of a car passing by. She froze. Had anyone seen her? Had the government already discovered her secret? She rushed to the window, her heart pounding. But there was nothing there, just the quiet suburban street, empty and calm. For now, at least, she was safe. But Emily knew this was only the beginning. The creature, Zurath it had called itself, had been hiding for a long time. Now it was asking for her help. And no matter the danger, Emily knew she couldn't turn her back. The future was about to change forever. Emily sat by Zurath's side for what felt like hours, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. The alien, despite his strange appearance, was more human than she had initially realized. His eyes were filled with something she couldn't quite place. Fear, yes, but also a sense of gratitude. He seemed to understand her in a way that didn't require words, and somehow she felt as though she understood him too. She watched as he slowly began to regain his strength, though his injuries were severe. His limbs trembled as he moved, but he did not speak, at least not aloud. Instead, his thoughts filled her mind like whispers, fragments of his history, his race, and the terrible journey he had undergone. The more Emily learned, the more she realized how little she truly knew. She had always believed in the possibility of life beyond Earth, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Zurath's people, he explained, were called the Xirak. They were a peaceful race, once spread across countless worlds. They had traveled through the stars for centuries, studying life, sharing knowledge, and fostering peace wherever they went. Earth, however, had been a forgotten world in their records. Their scouts had landed here long ago to observe and to ensure that Earth would be ready for contact with other races. But something had gone terribly wrong. Zurath had been part of that scout team. His mission was simple: observe, gather data, and return. But after the crash, when the team was stranded, everything changed. War had erupted among the Xirak's enemies, an enemy that had destroyed their civilization. The Orcs, a race of ruthless conquerors, had hunted down every Xirak they could find. They were relentless and powerful, and now it seemed they were after Zurath too. "They are coming," Zurath said to her one night, his voice again in her mind. "They will find me. They will find us." Emily's stomach tightened. She had always known there was danger in helping him, but hearing it so clearly, coming from him, made everything feel so much more real. She couldn't afford to be naive. These Orcs, whoever they were, had the power to destroy entire civilizations. They had already wiped out Zurath's people, and now they were after Earth. As Zurath rested, Emily took to her computer, researching everything she could find. She scoured scientific journals, classified documents she'd gotten her hands on over the years, and anything else that might shed light on the enemy Zurath spoke of. The information was scant, but there were whispers, rumors, of a powerful alien race called the Orcthar. They had come into contact with Earth's military, though no one had publicly acknowledged it. The government, it seemed, had known more than they had let on. And there it was, an unmarked file, one that caught her attention. It contained references to a fleet of ships, not unlike the descriptions Zurath had given her. The Orcthar were not just a race of conquerors, they were technologically advanced, capable of bypassing Earth's defenses. They were ruthless in their pursuit of power. Emily shivered. The government knew about them. They knew about Zurath. Her mind raced. What would happen if the government found out that Zurath was alive? She had no doubt that they would take him. But would they help him, or would they use him as a weapon? She had worked with the government long enough to know how they operated. They would see Zurath as a resource, something to exploit. They would never see him as the victim of a greater war that had nothing to do with Earth. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Emily froze. Who could that be? Her heart raced and she instinctively glanced toward the couch where Zurath was resting. The alien was still unconscious, but she wasn't sure how long that would last. She had to be careful. She moved cautiously toward the door, peering through the peephole. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw the tall figures in black suits standing on her porch. Her mind went into overdrive. Who were they? The government? Or was it the Orcthar, somehow already on Earth? Before she could think further, a voice called out, breaking her concentration. "Dr. Carter," a calm, authoritative voice said. "We know you're in there. We need to talk." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She didn't recognize the voice, but the tone was too familiar. She had worked with government officials for years. She knew that tone. These weren't just casual visitors. These people meant business. She quickly ducked out of view and backed away from the door. She needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. Her mind raced. She couldn't just let them in. She couldn't trust them, not with Zurath. Her thoughts turned to the alien. What if they had already found out? What if they were here to capture him? She couldn't risk it. Not yet. She made a quick decision. She grabbed her phone and sent a message to her closest colleague, Dr. Marcus Smith, a physicist she trusted. The message was simple: emergency. "They know I need help. Come now." She didn't have time to explain more. She had to move fast. The knock on the door came again, this time louder, more insistent. She glanced toward the couch once more, where Zurath lay. His chest rose and fell in slow, shallow breaths. He was still weak, still vulnerable. Emily couldn't let them take him. Not now. Her heart pounded as she rushed to the back door, her hands shaking as she opened it. There was a small path that led to the backyard, a hidden exit from her house that few knew about. It was a risk, but it was the only chance she had. She stepped outside and glanced over her shoulder, her mind racing. She couldn't stay in her home, not with those agents outside. She had to get Zurath to safety. Just as she was about to make her way down the path, she heard a voice call from the front yard. "Dr. Carter. We know you're here. You can't run from this. We know what you found." Emily's breath caught. They had already figured it out. They knew, and soon they would come for him. Emily's heart raced as she sprinted through the backyard, her footsteps heavy on the damp earth. The agents had already started to move toward the back of the house. She could hear their voices, low and stern, as they called out her name. Her hands were shaking, and she had to force herself to focus. There was no time to waste. Zurath needed to be moved, and quickly. She reached the small garden shed at the edge of the yard, where she kept tools for her personal projects. Behind it was a narrow path leading into the forest, one that would take her to a remote cabin she kept for emergencies. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to keep Zureth safe for now. She glanced back toward the house, her pulse quickening. The voices were getting louder, closer. The agents were moving through the house. They would find Zureth if she didn't act fast. Without thinking, she grabbed a large duffel bag from the shed, throwing in a few essentials, her phone, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and hurried back to the house. She couldn't risk them finding Zureth, not with the government closing in. The thought of what they would do to him made her stomach churn. Inside, the alien was still unconscious, but his breathing had become more shallow. His body trembled faintly, and Emily could see how fragile he truly was. He had suffered so much, his people destroyed, his life in danger, and yet he was still fighting to survive. Emily couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility for him. He had trusted her, and now she had to protect him. She lifted Zurath from the couch with as much care as she could muster, wrapping him in a thick blanket she had kept nearby. She needed to get him to the cabin. If she could just get there, they might have a chance to figure out what to do next. The government wouldn't stop looking for him, but at least there, she could hide him long enough to regroup. But as she moved toward the back door, the sound of footsteps on the porch froze her in her tracks. They were getting closer. She heard a voice, sharp and commanding, from just outside the window. "We know you're here, Dr. Carter. You can't hide forever." Emily's stomach twisted. It was now or never. She had no other choice. With a final glance toward the door, she ran toward the back exit, carrying Zurath with as much speed and care as she could manage. The forest path was narrow, winding, and covered in thick underbrush. Emily struggled to keep her footing as she moved through the trees, Zurath's weight heavy in her arms. She could hear the sound of distant voices, shouting her name, but she refused to look back. She couldn't afford to make any more noise. They had to be close now. The wind howled through the trees, as if urging her to move faster. Emily's legs burned with exhaustion, but she pressed on, her mind focused on one thing: the cabin. The small, isolated cabin in the woods that she had once used for weekend getaways, now the only safe place she could think of. She reached the clearing where the cabin stood, a small wooden structure that seemed almost swallowed by the trees. It was hidden well enough that no one would find it easily. With the last of her strength, she reached the door and kicked it open, slipping inside with Zurath in her arms. Inside, the cabin was quiet, dimly lit by the faint light filtering through the cracks in the walls. It smelled of dust and pine, but it was safe, at least for now. Emily carefully laid Zurath down on the worn sofa, covering him with another blanket. She stood over him for a moment, her mind racing. The agents would be out there looking for her. They would never stop searching until they had him, until they had answers. She had to keep him hidden. She turned toward the small kitchen area and grabbed a bottle of water and a simple first aid kit. As she walked back to Zurath, she tried to calm her thoughts. She needed to think clearly. She had to keep him safe, but she also needed to understand what was happening. The more she learned about Zurath, the more questions she had. Why had he been sent to Earth in the first place? Why had his people been forgotten? And what was it that made the Orcthar want to destroy them? Zurath's eyes fluttered open, and his dark gaze met hers once again. The connection between them seemed almost tangible. His mind reached out to hers, and though she had no formal training, she felt the weight of his emotions. "I am sorry," he said softly, his voice a quiet thought in her mind. "I never wanted to put you in danger. You are not part of this fight." Emily shook her head, refusing to let him take the blame. She didn't care about the danger. He needed help, and she had made a promise to him. "It's not your fault," she whispered aloud, though she wasn't sure he could hear her words. But he did hear her, his gaze softening. "You have shown me kindness. I will repay you in any way I can." Emily smiled sadly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I don't need repayment," she said. "I just need to keep you safe." She didn't know how long they would be able to stay in the cabin before the agents found them. The government had resources, people who would track them down no matter how far they ran. But for now, it was enough. They had a brief moment of peace. As the night wore on, Emily found herself thinking about the aliens' words, their meaning, their implications. She could sense the sadness and the fear in Zurath's mind, but there was also something else, something that felt like hope. Hope that somehow she could help him and his people. The thought lingered with her long after the darkness outside had deepened. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. The government would come for them, and when they did, Emily would have to be ready, for Zurath's sake and for the sake of Earth itself. But that wasn't something she could focus on just yet. Right now, Zurath needed rest. He had been through too much and he needed to heal. As for Emily, she needed to keep her wits about her. She couldn't afford to let fear take over. She had come this far. She wouldn't stop now. The night was eerily silent, save for the rustling of the wind through the trees. Emily sat beside the sofa, watching over Zurath as he slept. She knew the danger was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that there might still be hope. And somewhere deep in her heart, she felt a sense of determination, a quiet certainty that she was meant to be part of this extraordinary journey. Days passed in the cabin, and though Emily tried to remain calm, she couldn't ignore the constant sense of urgency that hung in the air. She kept to a strict routine, checking the perimeter, ensuring Zurath had everything he needed to recover, and monitoring the ever-growing threat from the government. Each day, the fear of discovery crept closer, but there was little she could do except wait and prepare. Zurath's condition slowly improved. His injuries, though serious, weren't as fatal as she had feared. He began to regain strength, and his energy grew with each passing day. As he rested, he shared more of his people's history with Emily, telling her of their once great civilization, how they traveled the stars in peace, spreading knowledge to countless worlds. But everything had changed when the Orcthar appeared. They were relentless, their thirst for conquest never-ending. Zurath's people fought back, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and overwhelmed. In the end, the Orcthar had wiped them out, and Zurath had been left behind. The alien's words haunted Emily. It was clear now that Earth was more than just a peaceful planet caught in the crossfire. It was a strategic location. The Orcthar were coming for it, and Zurath, though he had no idea why, was part of the reason. They wouldn't stop until they had him. They wouldn't stop until Earth was theirs. But Zurath wasn't alone anymore. Emily had promised herself that she wouldn't let them take him. She couldn't let him face this war on his own. One evening, as the sun began to set and the woods around the cabin darkened, Emily sat at the small table, sorting through the papers she'd gathered over the past week. She had been researching everything she could find about the Orcthar, the government's secret dealings, and anything that might help her understand what was at stake. But it was a dead end. There was nothing concrete. The government had done its best to keep any information on the Orcthar hidden, and there were no answers to her questions. It was then that she heard the sound of a car engine in the distance. Her breath caught in her throat. The cabin was tucked away, far from the nearest road, so anyone who approached had to know exactly where they were going. She stood up quickly, her pulse quickening. It was too late to hide now. The government had found her. The Orcthar had found her. She didn't know who it was, but she knew they were getting closer. She rushed to the window, peering out through the thin curtains. In the distance, the headlights of an SUV glowed faintly. It wasn't just one vehicle, it was several. They were coming. Emily's heart raced as she turned back toward Zurath, who had sensed the danger long before she had. His eyes were wide, his breathing quick, and his face drawn with worry. "They are here," he thought, his voice like a distant echo in her mind. "They have found us." She could hear the tires crunching over the gravel road now, getting closer and closer. She knew it wouldn't be long before they reached the cabin. There was no time to lose. "Zurath!" Emily said, her voice steady despite the panic that surged through her. "We have to move. Now." He nodded, his face grim, and stood up with surprising speed. His movements were still stiff, but his strength was returning. They couldn't wait. They couldn't stay here. Emily quickly packed the essentials, her phone, a few tools, some food, and a change of clothes. She grabbed the bag she had packed days earlier and slung it over her shoulder. They didn't have much time. The vehicles were close now. "Come on," Emily said, motioning for Zureth to follow her. "We'll take the back way. We have a safe place, another cabin, deeper in the woods." Zureth hesitated for a moment, his dark eyes searching hers. "You are risking everything for me," he thought. "Why?" Emily met his gaze, her expression firm. "Because you're not alone anymore. You've been fighting alone for too long. Now you have me." With no more words between them, they slipped out the back door of the cabin and into the thick trees. The night was silent, except for the sound of their footsteps as they hurried along the hidden trail. They moved swiftly, avoiding the main paths, as the sound of the approaching SUVs grew louder. The agents, whoever they were getting closer by the minute. They didn't stop. Emily's legs burned from the effort, but she kept moving, keeping her focus on the path ahead. She knew that if they were caught, there would be no way out. The government wouldn't hesitate to take Zureth, and once they had him, it would only be a matter of time before the Orcthar came to finish what they had started. It felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes before they reached the second cabin. This one was smaller, older, and more hidden than the first. The door creaked as Emily pushed it open, and they both slipped inside, breathless and tense. The cabin was dark, but Emily had prepared it ahead of time. Food, water, and blankets were stacked in the corner, along with a few supplies she had managed to gather over the years. She quickly locked the door behind them and closed the blinds, making sure there were no signs of them being followed. Zureth collapsed onto the small couch, his breathing labored from the effort. Emily set the bag down and knelt beside him. She could see the exhaustion on his face, but he wasn't giving up. "Not yet. We can't stay here for long," Emily said softly, taking a deep breath. "We'll need to move again soon. I don't know how much time we have before they start searching." Zureth's eyes met hers, and for the first time Emily saw something more than fear in his gaze. There was a quiet determination. "We will not run forever," he thought. "There must be a way to fight back." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Fight back? What did he mean? She had no idea how they could fight against such overwhelming odds against enemies like the Orcthar, but Zureth's mind seemed set on the idea. "Fight," she repeated, her voice uncertain. "How? We're outnumbered. You saw what happened to your people." Zureth sat up, his expression fierce. "The Orcthar are powerful, but they are not invincible. My people knew peace, not war, but we had the power to defend ourselves. It is time I remember that power. It is time for Earth to fight." Emily stared at him, her mind spinning. She had never imagined that things would come to this. She had thought she was helping an alien in need. Now she was part of something much bigger, something that would determine the fate of Earth itself. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice filled with determination. "What do you need?" Zureth closed his eyes, his mind reaching out, and when he opened them again, his gaze was filled with purpose. "I need your help. Together we will stop them." Emily nodded. "Then let's get to work." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside the cabin, Emily and Zureth made their plans. The road ahead was uncertain, and the enemy was closing in. But for the first time since meeting Zureth, Emily felt a spark of hope. They had a chance. And she wasn't going to let that chance slip away.